Margaret had been working at Rosie's Diner for nearly 15 years, and she knew every regular customer by name and coffee preference. At 58, she moved with the practiced efficiency of someone who had poured thousands of cups of coffee and served countless plates of eggs and bacon. The diner sat on the edge of town where the highway curved past fields of corn and soybeans, and it had been her second home since her divorce. All those years ago, the morning started like any other, with the familiar sounds of coffee brewing and bacon sizzling on the grill. Margaret tied her apron strings and checked the sugar dispensers, making sure everything was ready for the breakfast rush. She had always taken pride in her work, believing that everyone deserved a hot meal served with a smile regardless of who they were or where they came from. Around 10:30, the rumble of motorcycle engines filled the parking lot. Margaret looked through the window and saw a group of bikers dismounting their Harleys. They wore leather jackets with patches and bandanas, and their beards were gray and weathered from years on the road. Most of the other customers glanced nervously toward the door as the group of 8 men walked in with heavy boots echoing against the checkered linoleum floor. Frank, the owner, was behind the counter counting receipts when he saw the bikers settling into the large corner booth. His face immediately darkened, and he walked over to Margaret, who was already reaching for her order pad. "Margaret," he said in a low voice, "I don't want those types in here. They make the other customers uncomfortable. Tell them we're closed for cleaning or something." Margaret looked at the group of men who were quietly studying their menus. She had seen their kind before, and while they looked rough around the edges, they seemed peaceful enough. One of them, an older gentleman with kind eyes and silver hair, caught her attention as he helped another man who appeared to have trouble reading the menu. "Frank, I can't do that," she said softly. "They're just people looking for breakfast. They haven't caused any trouble." Frank crossed his arms and his voice grew stern. "Margaret, these are paying customers pointing to the other patrons, and I need to protect my business. Either you refuse to serve them or you can find another job." Margaret felt her heart sink. She had worked at this diner through good times, and bad had covered shifts when others called in sick had stayed late to help with inventory. The thought of losing her job terrified her, but the thought of turning away hungry people felt even worse. She walked over to the table where the bikers sat. The silver-haired man, who seemed to be their leader, looked up at her with a gentle smile. "Good morning, miss," he said politely. "Beautiful day, isn't it?" "It certainly is," she replied, taking a deep breath. "Margaret and I'll be taking care of you gentlemen today. What can I get you started with?" Frank watched from behind the counter, his face growing redder by the minute. Margaret took their orders with the same care she showed every customer, asking about coffee preferences and making sure they knew about the daily specials. The bikers were courteous and patient, even joking gently with her about the weather and complimenting the cleanliness of the restaurant. As she walked past Frank to place their order, he grabbed her arm. "What do you think you're doing, Margaret? I told you not to serve them." "Frank, these are good people," she whispered back. "They've been nothing but polite and respectful. One of them is even helping his friend who has trouble with his eyesight." "I don't care," Frank snapped. "Either they leave or you leave. It's that simple." Margaret looked back at the table where the men sat talking quietly among themselves. She thought about her mortgage payment due next week and her old car that needed new tires. She thought about how hard it would be to find another job at her age. But then she looked at their faces and saw her own. Father in their weathered features, her own brothers in their gentle mannerisms. "Then I guess I leave," she said quietly, removing her apron. The diner fell silent as Margaret gathered her purse and walked toward the door. The silver-haired biker stood up as she approached their table. "Miss Margaret, is everything all right?" he asked with genuine concern. "Everything is fine," she said with as much dignity as she could muster. "I hope you gentlemen have a wonderful day." As she pushed through the door, she heard Frank announcing loudly that the restaurant was temporarily closed for maintenance. The other customers grumbled as they gathered their belongings, but the bikers simply nodded, understanding what had really happened. Margaret walked home through the quiet streets, feeling the weight of uncertainty pressing down on her shoulders. She had always believed in doing what was right, but now she wondered if her principles had cost her everything. At home, she sat at her kitchen table with a cup of tea and tried to figure out what she would do next. The next morning, Margaret was still in her robe when she heard motorcycles in her driveway. She peered through the curtains and saw the same group of bikers from the day before. The silver-haired man was walking toward her front door carrying what appeared to be flowers. She opened the door before he could knock, and he smiled warmly at her. Miss Margaret, he said, my name is Robert, and these are my friends from the Veterans Motorcycle Association. We wanted to thank you for your kindness yesterday and to give you something. He handed her a beautiful bouquet of wildflowers and an envelope. Margaret invited them all into her living room where they sat on her furniture looking somehow smaller and gentler in her cozy home. We heard what happened after we left, Robert said. Frank told everyone in town that he had to fire you because you wouldn't follow his rules about not serving troublemakers. We wanted you to know that we appreciated your courage. Margaret opened the envelope and gasped. Inside was more money than she made in 3 months at the diner, along with dozens of handwritten notes from people in the community. How did you? She began. We spent yesterday talking to people, Robert explained. We told them about your kindness and about what really happened at the diner. Turns out you have more friends in this town than you might have realized. The money came from donations and the notes are from people whose lives you touched over the years. Margaret read through the messages with tears in her eyes. There were notes from elderly customers who remembered how she always made sure they had extra blankets on cold mornings. Messages from young mothers who recalled how she would entertain their children while they tried to eat in peace. Letters from truckers who wrote about how her friendly smile had brightened their long, lonely drives. One note in particular caught her attention. It was from Sarah, a young woman who had been a single mother struggling to make ends meet. Margaret, you probably don't remember me, Sarah had written, but you used to let me sit in your section for hours with just a cup of coffee when I was between jobs and had nowhere else to go. You never made me feel unwelcome, and sometimes you would slip me a sandwich saying the cook had made too much. Your kindness gave me hope during the darkest time in my life. Robert cleared his throat gently. There's something else, Margaret. We spoke with Tom Bradley, who owns the cafe on Main Street. He heard about what happened and he would like to offer you a job. Better pay, better hours, and he specifically said he values people who treat everyone with dignity. Margaret wiped her eyes and looked around at the faces surrounding her. These men who had been judged so harshly by Frank had spent their day thinking not of revenge but of how to help someone who had shown them kindness. Why, she asked. Why would you do all this for me? Robert smiled and his eyes crinkled at the corners. Because, miss, that's what good people do for each other. You saw us as human beings when others saw only our appearance. You treated us with respect when it cost you something important. That kind of character is rare and it deserves to be honored. One of the other men spoke up. His voice was rough but gentle. Margaret, my name is Bill and I want to tell you something. Yesterday was the anniversary of my son's death. He was killed in Afghanistan 5 years ago. I was having a hard morning and my friends brought me out for breakfast to try to cheer me up. When you served us with such kindness, it reminded me that there are still good people in the world. You helped me more than you'll ever know. Margaret felt overwhelmed by the generosity and love surrounding her. She had always believed in treating people well simply because it was right, but she had never expected such kindness in return. Over the following weeks, Margaret started her new job at Bradley's Cafe, where she was welcomed warmly by both the owner and the regular customers. Many of the people who had donated to help her became regulars, making sure to sit in her section, and often leaving generous tips along with kind words. The Veterans Motorcycle Association made Bradley's their regular breakfast spot, and Margaret looked forward to their visits. She learned their names and their stories, discovering that Robert had been a teacher before retiring. Bill had worked as a mechanic and raised 4 children. And another member named Charlie had spent 30 years as a nurse helping people in their most vulnerable moments. Frank's business at Rosie's Diner began to decline as word spread about what had happened. Many longtime customers chose to take their business elsewhere, not because they necessarily supported the bikers, but because they admired Margaret's principles and were disappointed in Frank's behavior. One afternoon, about a month after the incident, Frank appeared at Bradley's Cafe. He looked tired and defeated as he approached Margaret's tray.